Hey friends, so we all know that poi moves in cycles, and sometimes there are things that are really fashionable at one point that fall out of fashion and then come back into fashion years later. And today we're going to be talking about one such case. That's right, it's the return of Sock Poi. Drex here from Drex Factor Poi, bringing you the love of poi spinning and flow arts to benefit your body and brain. And today we are talking about those wild sock poi which appear to be in the midst of a renaissance. Who knew? Before we dive in, I just want to give a quick shout out to the friends of the channel. Big thanks to Dark Monk, Flow DNA, Flow Fests, Flow Toys, Pyroterra Light Toys, Spinballs, and Ultrapoi for helping to make the videos on this channel possible. You can learn more about all of these awesome companies and the work that they're doing to support flow artists like yourself by checking out the links that I've got down in the description of this video. So these are a pair of sock poi that I got from a Russian company that appropriately enough is called Sock Poi. It's being run by Katya Stakhanova, who is a flow artist and online instructor that I've respected for quite some time. And when she made the poi that she uses for her tutorials available, I of course was one of the first in line to grab a set. And it got me thinking that I've now seen sock poi re-emerging in a number of different kind of venues and everything throughout the flow arts world. And it gave me a moment to kind of think for a second about where poi have kind of come from in the way that they're made and where they might be going in the future. So like many flow artists, one of my first sets of poi was a pair of sock poi. They were a pair of stretchy striped socks that I got from Home of Poi that had these nice little LED balls that fit down in the ends of them and everything. And like, there's no doubt that they were quite beautiful, you know, especially those striped sock poi. The effect that they created when you spun them really fast and everything was so visually dynamic that, you know, especially for me circa like 2009, 2010, there was a lot to be really excited about with those. But there were also a couple things I was a little bit less excited about. You know, as anyone who has gone down the path that we so frequently talk about for beginners, wherein, you know, you drop a couple water balloons full of rice into an old pair of socks and everything and swing them around, there's some things that you can figure out and work through with that arrangement, and there's some stuff that's a lot harder. You know, for example, all your basic butterflies and weaves and everything, you know, yeah, these are a great set of poi in order to get that done and everything. But once you start getting into stuff that involves, let's say, like, you know, releasing the handles, i.e. you're going to do some throws or contact or what have you, or even you're just going to play around with stalls, all of a sudden those stretchy socks start to become a little bit of an issue. And I would say that there was a movement towards something that I will refer to as a static sock that I remember happening about like 2010, maybe 2011-ish. And, you know, there were many, many different sources for this. You know, Nick Woolsey had his cone poi that were sold through Home of Poi. I remember hanging out with G during this period, and G was using a set of these kind of static sock poi that I believe he'd actually sewn for himself. And of course, there were the sets of sock poi that you could buy at any of the Flow Arts Institute events. You know, the same woman who was manufacturing those eventually created sock poi for Master Ong's prop shop as well. And for a brief time, I actually considered getting sets of sock poi like that and putting them in my own online shop. But there were a couple things even with this design that didn't quite work for me. Without a doubt, the biggest one was just that we were still in the middle of the finger loops era. Most of these designs involved having either double or single finger loops that were kind of integrated into the sewing pattern for these poi and everything, so there was no real way around them. I remember a particularly frustrating afternoon where I tried to attach handles to a set of those fabric comb poi, the more static sock poi that I'd gotten at a FAI event and everything. And not only did it take a significant chunk of time in order to attach those handles, but I tell you what, I will never be able to get them off. So then I wound up going down the route that most people for the past decade have. That's right, I got into contact poi. And I think people today might not realize just how big a revolution contact poi were and have been to the poi world. I think a lot of people see them as this kind of place where we've focused a lot of innovation in tricks over the years. But the thing is, not only did these open up the door to a whole new set of tricks, but they also opened up the door to an entirely new business model within the flow arts. You know, I was one of many people that was making and selling contact poi. You know, when it came to manufacturing the sock poi, especially those like static fabric poi and everything that didn't stretch, you had to have a sewing pattern that you were working from. You had to have access to a sewing machine in order to make them. You know, it was a lot of really, really hands-on work that I think a very small circle of people were really interested in doing. But contact poi, like literally all it took was you get yourself a set of stage balls, some rope, whatever handles you may want, and, you know, a power drill. Maybe if you want to save your hands a little bit, you might also get like a screwdriver to, you know, push the knots into the heads on and everything. But by and large, like the construction of these was so incredibly simple that it really democratized the manufacturing of poi in a way that nothing had before. You know, I could buy all the components to make a set of poi that looked as professional as the stuff that I was seeing all of my idols using in their videos and everything, and that felt pretty cool. And of course, it should be said that the manufacturing techniques for these were such that, you know, at my peak, I want to say that I could make probably a dozen of them in an hour. And you know, it was one of those things then that once you're able to produce product on that kind of scale and everything, it also drives down the prices and the barriers to entry for getting into poi. So contact poi didn't just change the landscape in terms of how we were spinning and what kinds of tricks we were spinning and everything, but also in terms of the kinds of businesses that were possible to create with poi. You know, at one point, I remember there being dozens of different shops on Etsy that were all selling their own contact poi and everything. And, you know, with such a low barrier to entry for creating these and everything, it also created an entirely different problem, which was, how do you tell the difference between all of these companies making them? And of course, that exerted a lot of downward pressure on the price of poi, you know, both in ways that were good for the consumer because it meant that people could get cheaper and cheaper poi, but also bad for the manufacturers because when you're only able to make so much from a sale, but you're competing with a dozen other companies and everything, then all of a sudden your ability to make a profit per unit drops dramatically. And I feel like we've kind of reached an equilibrium at this point where, you know, the number of companies out there that manufacture contact poi are few enough now that they're no longer kind of cannibalizing sales from each other. And that's also meant that the price of them has stabilized a whole bunch. So this has been, without a doubt, a good development for the poi world, but it wasn't clearly the end of the story either. Because there's a lot of things to like about contact poi. They make stalls look beautiful. There are things that they're so incredibly good at because they focus the viewer's attention on the very, very tips of the poi. But there's also a built-in problem there too, in that what happens with the tether then very frequently kind of becomes lost in that mix. You know, I think those of us who have had careers during the heyday of contact poi and everything will sometimes forget that a lot of the kind of basic tricks that people learn at the beginning of their journey and everything have kind of been created with the idea in mind that the full length of the poi was contributing to the image that that trick was producing and everything. And while contact poi can make a lot of things look really beautiful, you know, all of that nuance to the entire length of the poi can really frequently get lost. And thus, sock poi re-enter the picture. So probably the first instance of sock poi being used in the recent past that really grabbed me would have been the work of Loop, a partner poi group that's based out of, I think, Berlin, I want to say. And they very deliberately used sock poi in all of their performances. Not only did it give them a very unique vibe that almost nobody else was doing at the time, but also a lot of the tricks that they were focusing on and everything just looked really, really beautiful with them. There's something really interesting that happens when you're performing tricks with the entire length of the poi. Now, there are some things that just don't look as good. Like, for my money, a stall will never look as clean except when you're doing it with a set of contact poi, because any little wobbles in the tether whatsoever are going to read so loud and clear with a set of sock poi. At the same time, there's a lot of other tricks that I would argue are kind of more traditional in the line of things like, you know, body tracers and reels and everything, that once you're working with the entire length of the poi, just take on an entirely new gravity. And then in the past couple of years, we've seen the emergence of Sock Poi as a company. We've seen the emergence of Poi to the World. I think there are some other companies now that are making Sock Poi regularly. They're definitely seeming to be making a comeback right now. And despite the higher barrier to entry in manufacturing them, you know, there's clearly a demand there. So it's meant that a lot of these manufacturers now have a captive audience of people that are super interested in the differences in how Sock Poi can make their tricks look. And, you know, the market's wide open for them there. And working with Sock Poi again has been an interesting reminder, at least for me, of some of the things that I sometimes take for granted about contact poi. You know, it's one of those things that with contact poi, there's very little air resistance overall. You know, the bulk of the mass of it is concentrated down into the head, and the tethers usually just don't pick up that much resistance. Whereas with Sock Poi, you get much more air resistance because there's just much more surface area for the air to interact with. In some ways, that like kind of makes your spinning a lot more deliberate, and it also kind of reveals the way that the poi work within the space around you in ways that they wouldn't otherwise. You know, there's certainly something to be said of seeing somebody's style from within the context of the poi that they're using to spin. And especially in the case of Katya, who I got these poi from and everything, having picked up her sets of poi now, I have so much better an understanding of where her style has come from and how her poi have become a part of it. And it should be said that when you have more surface area to the poi and everything, all of a sudden it quickly becomes clear that you can use that surface area to much more effect in terms of the aesthetics of the poi itself and how it matches you yourself. It hasn't escaped my attention that in watching Katya spin and everything, you know, she has this very unique sense of style, especially among poi spinners, where you see her like with the loose fitting tops and everything, and the way that they complement these sock poi as they move around her and everything, you know, I think that that's a very strong and deliberate aesthetic choice, and I think it's part of what makes her so distinctive as a poi spinner. And of course, it's also a great reminder to me too that with Sock Poi, you cannot fake your planes at all. Whereas with contact poi, because the tethers kind of disappear somewhat, people really only concentrate on the movement of the heads and, you know, seeing what shapes they're producing and all that. When you have the entire length of the poi that's registering with the audience and everything, all of a sudden, if your planes are off by even a little bit, ooh, does it ever read? And it should also be said, any kind of plane breaking or plane bending moves you do with these, say, you know, toroids or G-style plane breaking and everything, if you're off even a little with these, it is going to register right away. And I think it's probably no coincidence that Sock Poi were G's preferred poi back in the day. And when we were all marveling at how unbelievably clean his plane breaking was and everything, it was because he had been training with poi that left him literally no margin of error for doing those plane breaks with. And of course, it's also helped me to understand why a lot of the people that I see using these, especially in Russia, have styles that are so completely based around pendulums and not necessarily making the poi move fast, but making them move in a precise manner. Again, I think that a big part of that is the poi that they're using in order to get there. So as Russian style spinning has become a lot more popular in recent years, and of course, as supply for these have become available, and especially supply of them with ball handles, because that's just the era that we're living in and everything, yeah, it appears that Sock Poi have been making a comeback. Who knew? So I have been enjoying my time with my Sock Poi, and if y'all out there are interested in getting sets for yourself, I highly recommend giving them a spin and seeing how they make you think about your spinning and the things that you may change as a result of that. I definitely noticed a lot of things about my style changing as I spun these. Sock Poi, of course, are based out of Russia, and the shipping time is kind of a pain in the butt, but also the construction is really amazing on them. I might do a review for these later. Y'all can let me know if you'd like to see that. Here in the United States, there's also Poi to the World, which is based out of Massachusetts, and it's run by a friend of mine. Do check them out. I'll leave links to both companies down in the description. But in the meantime, if you enjoyed this video and walking down memory lane with me, please make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, not only to help other people discover this video, but also to help my channel grow. And a huge thank you, because this video would not be possible without the kind contributions of these amazing folks right here. These are my Flow patrons over on Patreon, and they, along with the wonderful folks listed down in the description, make this video and all the videos on this channel possible. If you would like to support my mission in bringing flow arts to the whole wider world, helping people inhabit their bodies and using props to give them permission to move, you can do so by heading on over to patreon.com/DrexFactorPoi and signing up. There you can get early access to all of my content, as well as a say in what topics I tackle in the future, and plus which some awesome behind the scenes and extra stuff there on occasion too. So go check that out. Please and thank you. Do you have a preference between Contact Poi and Sock Poi? What do you think are the pros and cons of each one? I would love to know. Leave me a comment and outline those. Did you start off with Sock Poi too? Did you start off with Contact Poi? How do you think either one has influenced your style? I'm really curious. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you all real shortly with a tutorial, I think, later on this week. Or no, it's going to be a flow video, excuse me. Anyways, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Peace.